AYANEO is making a DS, and no, I don't mean they're just making a clamshell. They're making a literal dual screen device according to leaks. But what would this newfound PC DS be useful for? What could this do that you couldn't just do on a Steam Deck? Yes, you could emulate DS and 3DS games on this. You could even emulate a Wii U if so desired. And of course, if this device ever becomes reality and I ever get one of these devices, that's like the first thing I would do. But if I had to be honest, that's like a very small subset of games you could be playing. What about emulating every other system? Better yet, what about just plain old PC games? Games that aren't really meant for this kind of interactivity. How would these games benefit? Before we get too deep into this, let's talk about the fact that there's two different versions of this device. First and foremost is the AYANEO Flip KB. This is a version of the device with a keyboard instead of a second screen. These sorts of keyboards aren't really meant to be used for anything besides maybe logging into something like Steam or whatever. For primarily PC related topics, this is immediately more useful. The keyboard won't be useful for controlling your character or anything, but if you need to alt F4 your game, you can do that. Back when this was the only AYANEO Flip around, I was thinking about getting this version, but now that there's a dual screen version, why bother? So yes, let's talk about the use cases for the dual screen version. Probably the most obvious and best use case for this device is DS, 3DS, and Wii U emulation. The DS and 3DS have two screens. Quite a few DS games made extensive use of the bottom screen. Some of them were extremely gimmicky, and some made smart use of it. But the big issue, of course, is that a lot of games that use the bottom screen are kind of difficult to play outside of the actual system itself. Yes, DS emulation is extremely good and very mature, but the fact of the matter is, it's not the same experience. Using a mouse to control what should be the bottom screen actions is not the same, and it's very clunky. Even devices like the Steam Deck itself, with a perfectly good touchscreen and trackpads, it's still kind of awkward to deal with bottom screen elements. But with this device, with a literal second screen, you can put the bottom screen elements on the bottom. Games look the way they should without having to cram two screens worth of information on a single screen like with most emulation setups. For the perfect authentic DS setup, you'll need a stylus of some sort though. 3DS is a similar story, but to a lesser degree because a lot of games aren't that reliant on the touchscreen itself. There aren't a whole lot of 3DS titles that make use of the touchscreen as the main control method. But the same applies here. You can move the bottom screen elements to the actual bottom screen itself. The Wii U is a bit of a different story because technically speaking, you can play the Wii U entirely without having a second screen. There aren't too many Wii U games, not to mention there's even less Wii U games that require having the Wii U gamepad. But for those games that have like maps and stuff on the Wii U gamepad while the main game is on your TV, you can move those elements. You can move the Wii U gamepad elements down to the bottom screen and have the main video game element on the top screen. You know, kind of like a higher fidelity 3DS. There is one other system that I think could benefit from having two screens, and that is the PS Vita? What? Well, let me explain. The Vita has a touchpad on the back of the system itself. There aren't a whole lot of games that made use of this Vita trackpad on the back, but for the few that do, you could just map that entire area to the bottom screen. That said, Vita 3K doesn't actually support mapping the back trackpads to anything. That'll probably come later. So yes, the main and probably best use for the bottom screen is emulation. But let's say for example you bought this wanting to play modern AAA titles. I could give you some sample use cases for something like this. How about playing a game on top and then having a guide at the bottom? I feel this works best with games like Terraria or Minecraft where you basically have to consult the wiki for every little recipe. You could have video guides at the bottom, or you could have maps and checklists at the bottom. That's pretty cool, I guess. There's also some other niche use cases as well. You could have Spotify at the bottom while you game at the top. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm not a huge fan of like pulling up other music while I game as well. I like to, you know, actually listen to the game itself. But you do you, and this is something you can do on this thing. Now here's an interesting thought experiment. Could you use the bottom screen to play mouse intensive games? Probably. I think you could put the entire game on the bottom screen. But what would be more interesting though is if you could use the bottom screen as a sort of trackpad. A trackpad to control your mouse and then click as well. If that were a thing, that'd be cool. But otherwise, we're just gonna focus on putting games on the bottom screen, I guess. like Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire does have pretty good controller support, but I think Slay the Spire makes more sense with a mouse or on a touchscreen. So I think Slay the Spire would actually be a pretty good fit. But what about RTSs like StarCraft? Well, I probably wouldn't recommend it. I mean, I'm sure it's theoretically possible, but I don't think it'd be super viable. But for something like Civ, where it's all turn-based, I think it's surprisingly a good fit. I also wouldn't try any MOBAs like League of Legends. You know, MOBAs without controller support. Dota 2 has controller support, so you could play that instead. I also wouldn't try controlling FPSs with a touchscreen. Yes, I know you did that with Metroid Prime Hunters, but don't try to tell me that's better than just having 2 sticks, which the AYANEO DS does have. So yes, those are some conventional ways to play games. But I have a more radical idea. Something that most people probably haven't thought about, and I'm sure AYANEO themselves haven't thought about this either. But what about makeshifting your own custom controls on the bottom screen for, you know, any games that might warrant the use? Games with a ton of keyboard hotkeys and stuff. The DS had a lot of good use cases for the touchscreen. Some games had you activate abilities using the touchscreen. Others let you change loadouts or even forms. And in some cases, menu management was done in the touchscreen. I think that would be a very interesting use case. Turning PC games into a sort of DS game, if you will. Heck, maybe I could put like performance overlays and all of that cool stuff on the bottom screen. But this is all just speculation. We know nothing about what the bottom screen can or cannot do. Not yet, at least. I'd love to hear more of your theories on how this bottom screen saga is gonna play out. Oh yeah, there's also one more thing that we need to speculate on. That is the price. How much is this thing gonna cost? Using my professional YouTuber wisdom, I'm gonna say at least $1,000. I suspect the keyboard model is gonna be cheaper, maybe by like $100 or so. I also think the dual screen variant's gonna have less battery life because, I mean, you're running 2 screens. Screens eat up a lot of juice. That's like a foregone conclusion. There's also the whole controller feel, dimensions, and all of that stuff that we really don't know anything about. I think Aya is gonna release more information later. But until then, I'll see you guys next time. If you liked this video, be sure to press the thumbs up button and spread the good gospel of high-tech lowlife. And if you want to see more high-tech lowlife, be sure to subscribe and press the bell icon for notifications. And for you enlightened individuals, be sure to join my Discord server. And if you wish to support high-tech lowlife, be sure to check out our Patreon page, links in the description down below.